Libby Schaaf. Thank you so much for joining us from Oakland, California. Really appreciate it. It is great to see you. I wish it was in person, but that is for another time. I know you as the mayor of Oakland, you have been hard hit, the African-American community, Latino, as well as immigrants in particular, but also Oakland is a place of big ideas and of innovation as well. So I want to kick off the conversation with a question. What is it that keeps you up at night?
Structural racism. The fact that we have institutions that are so grounded in inequity, the country's history of Native genocide, of slavery, and how those systems have perpetuated themselves in such disparate impacts. So going into this pandemic, we already had these structural inequalities. And as with many crises, they are only getting worse.
And specifically, I understand that you are dealing with those racial disparities because you are seeing the community, particularly in East Oakland. And what are you doing to specifically address the needs of that community?
Let me be clear that we launched a racial disparities task force before we had data about the disparate impacts of COVID-19. And there are two purposes. One, to have a rapid response in this moment to ensure that we don't see those disparate impacts. But secondly, and most important, and I challenge my organization every day that Oakland should be the silver lining city. And in this particular instance, I think that there's an opportunity, that there's a new level of national consciousness about racial disparities, especially in health, and that we need to take that awareness and capitalize on that with permanent policy and legislative changes so that we can do away with those huge health disparities that make certain populations more vulnerable when pandemics like COVID come along.
So you specifically, Oakland has been unique in that you've been able to partner with some very big influential corporations. So we understand that Twitter made an announcement when it comes to the digital divide. We've also seen Alphabet involved specifically when it comes to testing, as well as Facebook. And so when you were looking at the future and envisioning how your community sees the other side of this pandemic, how will that be unique and different from other cities because of those partnerships?
I think the lesson is be bold, be ambitious, take this moment where we can look for a crisis response that has a permanent impact. And really, the digital divide is a uniquely urgent need right now because our kids that don't have access to the tools of distance learning are being completely denied their education. And Oakland had already done that analysis. We had a very detailed plan to close the total digital divide for our city. And so we were ready for this moment. And that's what I think has led to us being so successful at attracting, like today, a $10 million contribution from Jack Dorsey, or earlier this week, a $20 million contribution from Steph and Aisha Curry, the Warriors star, and his amazing entrepreneurial wife, who are helping to not just support our restaurant industries, but feed people in this moment of need. So think big and be prepared.
And Mayor, talk about the governor. Governor Gavin Newsom actually announced that the California university system is going to be completely online in the fall. There will not be those physical classrooms and those college campus activities. Is it going to be necessary, do you think, for the public school system as well to follow suit?
Well, I will tell you, yesterday that probably wasn't as much of an option, and today it is. Because we have in Oakland roughly half of our students, 25,000 kids that don't have the tools to do distance learning. And that is just going to drive inequity even further. But because of this announcement today to close the digital divide, now our school district has a whole different set of information upon which they can make that decision. So that decision has not been made yet, but at least it now would be actually conceivable that K through 12 education might be able to continue with distance learning.
Let's talk about another vulnerable community, which is the homeless population. You have various ideas that are on the table and some of them that are actually being implemented now. One of them calling Operation Home Base, where some of the homeless are being put into FEMA trailers. And we know from the experience post-Katrina in New Orleans, I know some of my own relatives who were in those trailers. And one of the unintentional consequences is that because they didn't have long-term housing, affordable housing that was ready, they ended up languishing in those trailers for a good bit of time. Give us a sense of the permanent solution that you have.
I'm very clear that our first priority must be to prevent anyone from even experiencing homelessness in the first place. And Keep Oakland Housed is a very innovative public-private partnership that in its first year and a half kept more than 2,100 families from losing their housing. And the average cost was less than $3,000 a household. Our second priority is to get people permanently housed. And that's why whenever we do something like Project Home Base, we include housing navigators and what we call flexible rapid rehousing funding, because we want to be sure that shelter is temporary and that it's dignified and safe. And that is why we took the extra time and expense to not just throw up those trailers, but to actually connect each one to our sewer system, our water system, so that they each have a private functioning bathroom and shower and kitchenette, so that they are comfortable. But we have a full-time housing navigator on site who is working every day to get those residents in the trailers out of the trailers and into permanent housing that they can afford.
Mayor, there's been a lot of soul searching during this time. So what do you think is the most important quality of a leader now, today, in this historic time, this very unique time?
I think you have to be clear about your values. You have to articulate them and explain to your constituents how every decision you're making, every priority that you're choosing is aligned with your values. You know, I had a unique moment of entry into this pandemic. We had not had a lot of cases, but the cruise ship, the Grand Princess, had a breakout of COVID and was looking for a safe place to dock. And I'll never forget, getting a call on my personal cell phone from Governor Newsom in the middle of the day one day, asking me if the Grand Princess could come dock in Oakland. And there's that moment where you ask yourself, is this the right thing to do? And on one hand, I believe that in moments like this, we must see ourselves as part of an interconnected society that does not know national or city lines. On the other hand, Oakland, and particularly the neighborhood around the port where this ship was going to come dock, had really been victimized by years of environmental injustice and racism. And so the optics of a luxury cruise ship coming with its disease to this neighborhood that had suffered so much environmental injustice was also part of my decision making. And in the end, I felt like it was very important to accept these people and to do what I could to help them, even though they were not my citizens. And I never missed an opportunity in talking about accepting the Grand Princess to recognize the environmental injustice that that neighborhood had suffered. And so that is how I think as a leader, you can sometimes reconcile conflicting considerations by taking an action, but by talking about the context and frame.
How has this impacted you and your role as a mom, a daughter, a wife? I mean, clearly you're living a very different life now.
It does make me realize that I don't usually get to see my children very much. And that has been a silver lining for me, to see them. My kids are 12 and 14. And we've started a little tradition of an evening walk as a family. One of my favorite things that we've done during this pandemic is the Slow Streets program. We've identified 74 miles of roads, like 10% of the roads in our city. And we are every weekend closing down another set of them to through traffic. And we just got our first one in the neighborhood where I live. And to walk down the street as a family, it's not just the street that has been slowed down. I think it's our lives that have been slowed down. And it's giving us a moment to be more reflective and thoughtful.
I've heard that often you talk about the Rodel Fellowship as something that you use in your own experience day to day and also as a leader of your community. What do you share? What do you talk about when you have those stories, those lessons to tell?
Well, you know, I've been thinking a lot about the Rodel Fellowship because every couple of days, the big city mayors of California talk to each other. We have a Zoom, we're in our living rooms, it's 8:30 at night, and some of us are eating our dinner while we're talking. But we are, you know, roughly half Democrats and half Republicans. And yet we are so aligned in this moment about what our priorities are, what we're asking the federal government for, what we see as our roles as leaders. And so, you know, I just continually reflect that we have got to spend less time being Democrats and Republicans and more time being Americans.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Really appreciate your time and your insights as well.
Great, thank you. Stay safe, stay well.